Men who take baths, scene with Jacob. Take one. Action.
So good.
So good. So good. You are a professional bather, essentially.
I do have a lot of baths.
Why did you sign up to be part of Men Who Take Baths?
I mean, I wrote you a long application, but the real short answer is like I take a lot of baths, and I am a man, and so
check and check.
check and check, and that was how I heard about this in the first place. And I was like, if I could be in a bath and performing at the same time, that would probably be like the dream.
Is it living up to your expectations so far?
So much.
No bath will ever be the same.
No, for sure. I'm gonna try and imagine this every time I take a bath from now on.
Yes.
Yeah. I also really like the I guess mission statement or like where this came from as a concept, and was super keen to participate in that dialogue as well.
Thank you for being here and being part of this.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I think your perspective is really important and valuable, and so I'm really excited to dive into that with you. What is your first memory of you learning what it meant to be a man?
Oh man, that was probably an appropriate response. That's actually really hard because I spent a lot of time, I think, being very uncomfortable with not only what it meant to be a man, but before that with like what it meant to be a boy even, and feeling like I didn't fit into that, I guess like dominant trope of masculinity or stereotypical trope, whatever you want to call it. So I think it was actually not relatively recently, but definitely in my 20s that I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that I don't identify as anything other than a man, and therefore my discomfort around masculinity and my discomfort around, I think, men in general, because that's something that definitely like comes into that is like I think it was recently that I had to come to terms with the fact that if I'm not identifying as anything other than a man, then therefore I need to address masculinity and what I don't love or feel comfortable about it from the perspective of someone who is masculine and nothing. I mean, I think I have a feminine side that's pretty big, but like doesn't identify as anything other than that.
Wow, so you had to reconcile and almost look at this thing that you were trying to actively push away from.
Yes. Yeah.
What has that process been like?
It's been really positive, actually. So, can I do some backstory? Is that okay?
We love a backstory.
So I think like throughout my life, I've mostly had really close female friendships. Like it's not that I haven't had close male friendships. It's that I've always been someone who I think liked a lot of vulnerability in my close relationships, and that felt easier and more attainable with women. So when I was in my early 20s, I was spending a lot of time with my very close female friends, and they were opening up and sharing about like their interactions with men that were really not positive, that were like super negative, that like dealt with, I guess, like assault and I'm going to use the word rape and like other things like that. And I was, becoming increasingly aware of that dominant narrative. And in having these female like friendships and in not wanting to be a part of that narrative, I like started to very actively like dissociate from that. And part of that dissociation was never like identifying as something other than male, but I just like really felt that I was outside of that type of masculinity or outside of this dominant trope. And as I entered the professional sphere, as I got my first like real job and then started working and like interacting in the business world, which is where I work now. I'm an entrepreneur. I deal a lot with the like investment and tech startup space. And so I deal primarily, it's like dominated by men. And I became incredibly conscious in the professional sphere of how advantageous, and I feel kind of like uncomfortable saying that, but like how much privilege I was granted just by being male, and how I fit into these spaces just by being male. And I was watching these really, like, when there were women in these meetings, and I'm talking about like an older demographics, like my parents' generation, like 50s, 60s, is a lot of the people I interact with. And when there were women in those spaces, I watched like how tactful they were and how much more nuanced their communication felt, and began to realize like that was the product of having to work that much harder to be there. Well, I was this young guy getting mentorship opportunities, having a lot of people give me opportunities that I might not have otherwise gotten, or that might not have been so easily granted. And as I was like, oh, this is happening because I fit in to this, like visibly, I began to realize, I guess, how the dissociation I'd felt when I was younger was pretty problematic. And I also began to reflect more on my own masculinity, even at that time in my earlier 20s, where I was like, I'm not like that, and realized that in so many ways, like, I was like that's like internal, like that's a form, that dominant trope of masculinity, or toxic masculinity, if you want to call it that, is internalized in all of us, or all men. And even when I was trying to get out of it, I was still like practicing that on occasions, or it would still come out. And in my older 20s, like, that's where I guess the real reflection came, as I was looking back and realizing that I wasn't better than other men just because I like had this different lens through my female friends. I think, like, does that answer the question? Does that do it? I could probably ramble longer.
No. It's
yeah.
that gives me a lot to work with. Where are you at now with the reclamation of your masculine power and your masculine identity?
So I'm really actively trying to form close male friendships, and that are rooted in vulnerability, and that are rooted in like the same type of vulnerability I feel that comes really naturally in my relationships with my close female friends. I realized that the reason I didn't have a lot of that wasn't like other men's faults a lot of the time. It was actually mine, because I was so uncomfortable with like my peers, with like my male peers, that I wasn't letting them in either, and I wasn't like asking if they wanted to be let in. And so like I was a huge part of that. Like, I wasn't going the depth or making myself available to become as vulnerable as I would. And that was just because it felt harder or more uncomfortable. So I think like reclaiming that has been like, oh, like I fit into this. And so if I want to evolve it or change it, or like see masculinity become more positive or have more vulnerability in it, then I should be interacting with men in that way, not just like avoiding them. Yeah.
Where did that, because I know the disassociation from your own masculinity is one aspect of it. What was the seed that initially planted that fear of other men, where you didn't want to have that friendship?
So that's like hard to pinpoint. And it's not that I didn't have friendships, it's that I had them. I actually had many friendships. I'm a pretty social person. I normally self-identify as an extrovert. And I had a lot of friendships. And I remember in university, I had a whole group of male friends who I would say like totally fit into the classically masculine role. And I spent a lot of time with them, like at their apartment, where there's like 5 of them who lived together, and we had a good time. And I remember in my like mid-20s, one of them reached out and was like, I'm high on cocaine right now. And he's like, but I just want you to know, like, I've been in a really tough place, and you were one of my like closest friends when we were in university. And I had to like take pause with that, because I was like, you weren't one of my closest friends. In fact, I feel like I hardly opened up with you compared to the way that I open up with the people who I identify as really close. And that kind of was part of that perspective shift of like, maybe there's like a bigger thing here where if someone can feel that close to me, maybe that is close for many men. And I was like, I actually want to be way closer. And then I think that's kind of, I forget what the question was, but I think kind of that's where like that's where it kind of started to shift.
What do you think it is what's a barrier to men having other close friendships with men? Like, what's the barrier to intimacy?
I think I want to say it's like fear almost, but it's hard to place like where that fear comes from. Like, I think there's some level, there's like fear of like very stereotypical things like physicality and like physical conflict and stuff like that. But it feels like we live in a time where that doesn't necessarily seem like super, in my sphere at least, like relevant fear to have. I think there's like trust, which is the other component. I feel like it takes longer for me, and I would say maybe that's like a mutual thing to form a deep enough level of trust with men where we start to open up to each other. Where did you ask where this?
I was just kind of asking what the barriers were. Do you think that an inherent sense of like competition is almost is part of a barrier?
I think possibly the sense of competition. I think the sense too that we're like not supposed to feel. Like I come back to a lot of that. Like it feels kind of ridiculous to say that men aren't supposed to feel things because I know they do. But I think that idea that like men aren't supposed to share their feelings or are supposed to mask their feelings or are supposed to act practically and logically even in the face of their feelings is like really deeply flawed. But I think that's like internalized very deeply. I think that was internalized even in myself. And like when I was interacting with other men, I wasn't opening up and sharing how I was actually feeling as readily as I would with women. I also think there's that like the feelings that are okay are like anger and frustration. And I do think that really exists prominently and unfortunately. But like getting close, I'm 30 now, and getting closer to 30 as I like intentionally made the effort to try and have more male friendships, I realized that a lot of other guys were like me, where they wanted close male friendships and were willing to open up as long as there was like mutual intention in trying to facilitate that. I feel like it does take longer, but it's there. And I think the desire is really there. And I don't know if it's an age thing, but I feel like not only myself evolving, but other men around me evolving to want closer relationships with men too.
What in your life has had a profound impact on you becoming the man that you are today, sitting in the tub?
My mom, my dad too, for sure. But my dad, I would say, like, does fall into a lot of like dominant tropes of masculinity. Like he's not all that. He can be a very emotional guy, but I think my mom like taught a lot of lessons or provided a lot of insight into how to interact with people that are not only applicable for men, but for everyone. But some big things that jump out is her like, you should ask people questions. Like if you're on a date with someone, you should definitely ask questions. She always loves to tell the story about on her like first date with my dad, she had to tell him in the middle of it that she'd appreciate if he asked her questions too. And then it got way better. But so like things like that, I think like I watched one of the other people that you featured talk about like walking on the street at night and his perspective on kind of being self-aware of your own masculinity in that context. And those are things that like really came from my...
In that if you are walking down the street at night and you see a woman, to make the active effort to walk across the street to signal to her that you are safe and that she is safe.
Yeah, like, so I totally agree with that. Not necessarily that whole idea, but just the idea of being aware of what it's like when you're approaching someone from behind and they're a woman and you're like walking faster than them. and just, I think like so much of my understanding of how men are perceived by women and how to like try to make that feel like a more comfortable and safe experience comes from my mom. I would then say like the many like female friends that I have and that I've had over the years, and especially in my early 20s when I was living like not with my parents for the first time and had like a very close group of friends, all of whom were women, that like provided such a meaningful education, for lack of a better word, that I think like serves me so well today in being happy and being who I want to be and being comfortable being that person.
So your friendships with women allowed you to see women differently as well. You got some, I guess, insight perhaps on what their lived experience was like. And you're saying that you believe has made you a better man.
Yes, absolutely. And I think in having those conversations like with them, I was also usually the conversations around like, I don't feel like I have a lot of male friends. I wonder why that is, would start with women and would start with my female friends. And then they'd like prompt me with like, why do you think that is? And we'd have these like conversations. And I think the shift in, a lot of this is probably me, came through dialogue with women first. And so I think that's where I would go. I actually think, so I have a personal trainer. I'm gonna call him D for this, Big D, because he's a big guy. And he is like, he's big and strong, and he also like asks me a lot of questions and wants to know what's going on in my life. And at first, like I was working out with him for like, I feel like a couple of months before I started to open up. But then he's one of my closer male friends now, and we have a really like open friendship. Like we talk a lot. He knows a lot of stuff about me. I remember like telling him I was poly and that being like this really thing I was really nervous about. And him just being cool with that. And I think like friends like that who allowed me to like test trying to be more vulnerable and then like received that really well, were some of the people who like, there's other people like who did similar things, other men too, who helped with that. But he's one that like kind of jumps out.
Why were you nervous about sharing with someone that you're polyamorous?
I mean, it still feels like a kind of like out there thing to be. I mean, in the last like year alone, I feel like I've seen it go from this more obscure to suddenly there's all these accounts on social media that are like teaching you how to be poly. And I have been in like non-monogamous relationships for 8 years now. And that's always been kind of scary to share with people the first time, especially people who are married. So I think that was part of the reason why I was nervous in that instance, is like Big D is happily married and has kids. And I think people who live, with families that fit like the trope that we grow up with, is this is like the trajectory that a life follows. They almost like, they make me the most nervous about sharing that I don't have any desire to fit into that. Yeah.
Has your, how would I say this? Has your exploration of polyamory informed or helped you in your exploration and acceptance of masculinity? And I think the word that's guiding this question is the word compersion.
Yes. So I think like many men, particularly when they first get introduced to the idea of polyamory, it's like the idea of if they're straight, or even if they're like bi or queer, their nerves around poly are usually not around their female partner. If they have a female partner, being intimate with another woman, usually I think their nerves are primarily around like what the experience of how to work through the emotions associated with like their female partner interacting or being intimate with another man are. And that's definitely something that I had to work through too, but I felt willing and like the desire to work through that. I know that being uncomfortable is usually an opportunity for growth. So even in that like early discomfort, there was a lot of like, I still want to do this, and like I'm going to like, I would love to break down any like jealous feelings or possessive feelings that come up. Like I believe really strongly that love and possessiveness don't actually mix super well together. I think there's plenty of people who disagree with that, but that's my personal take. And so I really wanted to like break that down, and I wanted to break that down through like trial and error and experience. And at this point, like you brought up the word compersion, like I said the other day, like I think that's my favorite emotion. So I was.
Can you explain what it means, just for anybody that might actually?
Compersion is when you're happy for people who are close to you's happiness, or like, and you're happy. I think in the poly context, it's often like you're happy for your partners being happy with other people, and I love that feeling. Like, it's like when you see, when you watch people in the wild or out in public and you see like a really beautiful moment of people interacting, and you're like, wow, that like just boosted my mood because I just saw these like people kissing or like having a big hug, or these kids looking really happy or something like that. And compersion is like that, plus and love the person, and that just like amplifies it that much more. So like recently I was in BC, I was hanging out with like a female friend of mine, but someone who I have an intimate relationship with, and her partner asked if he could meet me. And it's been a long time since I've been in that actual situation, but I was like, yeah, definitely. I'm like nervous, I'm excited. And we went for like a walk, and it was great. Like I was like, I really like this guy, but also he really cared about her and she really cared about him, and that was so evident. And I was like, wow, this makes me really, really happy. So that's been every time I feel that now, it's not just the happiness of the compersion, there's almost like surprise and excitement at myself that it's like, I'm doing this successfully, like congratulations and amazing. And also, this isn't what people tell you when you're growing up is like possible, and doing something that like feels kind of impossible or at odds with what most people feel is possible is like the best.
What do you think are some of the necessary aspects for the highest articulation of healthy masculinity to be possible?
Could you ask me that a different way?
Yeah. What do you think, we hear a lot about toxic masculinity. Yeah. Let's put it this way. Yeah. We hear a lot about toxic masculinity, but not enough about what a transition to healthy masculinity could be. What are the necessary things or aspects or considerations that we need to start putting into the world that can initiate a truer or healthier form of masculinity to begin existing? Because I think we're tired of hearing about the toxic masculine, but we're not yet at the point where we can say what healthy masculine is.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I'm going to say a bunch of things. I think all of them have been said before by other people. I think this is becoming a bigger dialogue that people like you are initiating and instigating, and lots of other people have been for the last few years too, which is, I love. But I think like healthy masculinity is acknowledging that like men operate with a full emotional spectrum. I think it's acknowledging that like men suffer from like mental health crises, and like suicide rates are much higher amongst men, and a lot of that is probably tied back to the inability to express those emotions. So I think it's like men want to share, and if they can feel safe and comfortable sharing, they want to do that. I think it's breaking down the idea too that men are like protectors and like guardians, or I think they can be, and that's great. But I think the idea of being a good man is not inherently tied to being a a breadwinner for sure is not inherently tied to I'm doing knots again. So let me flip that around. I think like men in relationships where they don't make the most money, that's like really positive. That's really positive things. Like that's a positive change. I think like a shift in the split of like domestic labor is really positive, and I see a lot of men around me like really actively participating in that shift, and I think that's like amazing. And I think that's a dialogue that people have like in their personal like sphere of whatever they define their nuclear family, and I think that is a shift that we are seeing. It might be too slow for some people, but it's happening, and I love seeing men be like engaged fathers. I love seeing men like want their kids to operate on a full emotional spectrum, and therefore like through fatherhood, and I have quite a few male friends who are fathers, I see like fatherhood as this avenue through which many men like open up in ways that maybe they didn't when they were younger because of what was around them. And I see that shift as like a multi-generational process. So like I think it's in action, we are there, and like dads or fathers or like men in general are actively trying, they're out there and they're trying to make sure their kids and their friends are supported and know that it's okay to feel their feelings and okay to like talk about what's going on. And I think all of that comes down to more communication. Communication is better. This like stoic, like silent, like that's, yeah, like men are happy and talking. And when I see happy men, I'm like, smiling is like a, you know, in when you think about what a dominant like historical trope of masculinity is for the last maybe 100 years, because it's obviously evolved a lot over time. But smiling is like different. Like, so when I see men smiling and like smiling, especially when they first meet people and being like open through their face, like, I think that's like a shift in and of itself. It's a small shift, but like it's a shift.
How can women continue to support this growth in men? We are asking you for your growth and your evolution. How can we support you in that?
A lot of what I learned was through friendship. And so I think like friendship, not like the idea that a relationship between a man and a woman does not have to be romantic. In fact, it can be amazing if it's like platonic. And I actually still don't see as much of that maybe as I would like to see. So I think this idea of like men and women being friends and hanging out together, and I think like especially like one-on-one, like having one-on-one friendships that are like cross the gender binary is huge. And I think like, you know, that's a 50-50 relationship. So like you could say that could be something that women could like participate in by bringing like half of that to the table. I think too, like you mentioned like the questioning, but I think like sharing the experiences that are both positive and negative that women have had with men with other men, especially in the context of like a one-on-one dialogue or in a friendship. Like it doesn't need to be a TED Talk, and it doesn't need to be like at a conference on a women's panel. Like I think this change actually happens way more effectively when people feel safe, and I think people feel safest when they're like sitting down for a drink or sitting down for a coffee. So I'd tie a lot of it down to like being friends, and then like not availability, but like openness in sharing like the negative as well as like the positive, and why things felt negative and why some things feel really positive. And like I think most men really care about trying to be good people. And so like I think that the trap that I fell into was thinking that that wasn't the case, when actually it's like I think all people actually are trying to be good people. So I think if we like can set that aside and create environments where there's like vulnerable dialogue, and again I like come back to like the one-on-one because I find that works the best. I think that's a huge way that can evolve further.
Are you the man you want to be?
I'm working on it. Yeah. I am definitively a man at this point.
Okay, you've decided.
I've decided.
Okay.
And I think I'm trying really hard. It's a work in progress. I don't think that will ever end, but also I don't think I'd ever be satisfied as like a human if I was like, okay, I'm done growing at this point. So that's maybe a personal perspective, but it's like this trajectory for life could just go up and up and up until I die. So like, why shouldn't it? That would be my preference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been so cool.
You did great.
Thank you to people in the back, and thank you for nodding, because that really added a whole other level of comfort. I really appreciate that.
There.
It did.
We've hired. She's not actually a photographer. She's our professional nodder. She's here to give you confidence and make you feel good. So when you say things, she's like, yeah.
I was literally on a Zoom call with a bunch of investors, older men, and one of them at one point was like, oh, like, Jacob knows how to smile and nod and like how far that goes. And he was like teasing me, but also it's like, he's absolutely right. That goes a long way. So if you know how to smile and nod, like I can smile and nod, and thank you for smiling and nodding because it made me feel better. And I think that's like,
You're amazing. I was enjoying your conversation. So that was great.